Welcome to Saturday Morning Inspection. I'm Nick, and this is our daily NFL show. Happy Thursday to everybody out there, especially to United States men's national team with an impressive display in the knockout stage, the first knockout round of the World Cup. Not exactly sure about the red card situation there. I'm not a soccer guy, so if any of you guys know a lot about soccer, bad call, right call, whatever it may be, appreciate you providing a little extra context, a little extra information in the comment section below. Because frankly, I don't know anything about the rules except that the United States came ahead, and that's all that matters to me. Great job, boys. Keep the momentum going next Monday. But when it comes to the National Football League, a huge part of the NFL is the media. We just saw ESPN. It kind of went under the radar. They tried to bury it, but it was an incredibly embarrassing report when it comes to the four-letter network. We'll talk about that and what it means for the National Football League going forward, plus other news around the world of football. But first, let's get things going with how we do it every single day on this show, and that's with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And I want to pull up this graphic here, courtesy of Nutshell Sports, quickly becoming one of my favorite accounts to follow when it comes to all their analysis and just data and all that kind of good stuff. And what we have here is a graphic of offensive personnel diversity from 2025. You can see on this graphic here, the Dolphins, the Steelers, the Seahawks, and the Falcons and Washington were top 5 in personnel diversity. And the bottom 5 were the 49ers, Jets, Titans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Cincinnati Bengals. You'll notice there isn't exactly a ton of correlation between winning and personnel diversity. The Dolphins and Falcons and Washington were not very good. Seattle, of course, won the Super Bowl. The Steelers made the playoffs. Likewise, at the bottom there, the Titans and the Jets were not very good with low personnel diversity, but the 49ers and Jaguars were with lower personnel diversity as well. So again, not a lot of correlation between winning and mixing up your personnel packages. And I think here's the big takeaway, because right now it's in vogue. All the talking heads, all the columnists, all the Substack authors are like, you need personnel diversity, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, which means, if you're not familiar, 1 running back, 2 tight end, that's the 12, or 1 running back, 3 tight end, that's the 13. You need to mix it up. The reality is that's only something you do if you don't have talent, or you don't have a really good play caller, or you don't have a really smart quarterback. The New England Patriots under Tom Brady had very little personnel diversity, right? They didn't need it. They just play their guys. If you've got really good wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, you don't need to mix it up. Right, the Indianapolis Colts under Peyton Manning, when they were putting up crazy numbers with Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, Dallas Clark, Edgerrin James, do you think it would have been smart to mix it up and take Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne off the field to bring in their backup tight end more? Of course not. Now, you should use every tool you have in your tool belt to give you an advantage. If you lack elite talent, use personnel diversity. But if you have elite talent, use that. You know, Cowboys offensive coordinator Clayton Adams, the Cowboys, of course, have 2 good wide receivers in CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. He was asked about this. Hey, are the Cowboys going to use more of these, multiple tight end personnel packages? And he basically said, listen, if we take George Pickens off the field or CeeDee Lamb off the field, the opposing defenses are going to send us a thank you card, right? And that's 100% fair and 100% accurate. So personnel diversity is a tool. It's something you can use to give yourself an advantage, just like great play design, just like good play calling, just like good game planning, but it is not the entire thing. It's not everything. And this happens, all the time in the NFL. There becomes an in vogue strategy, an in vogue concept. And I'm far from anti 12-13 personnel. I think it's a really unique idea. The fact that teams like the Rams and the Seahawks are using it a lot more is very interesting, especially considering how successful those teams are. But it only works in the context, and personnel diversity in general only works in the context of a larger team strategy. So let's remember and focus on the larger team approaches for each and every one of the 32 NFL teams. Not just, hey, you should do more of X because it worked well for this team, because that's not how football works. Something to keep in mind. All right, let's get into the big news of the day. I thought it was the big news of the day. This is from Pro Football Talk. In a stunning and rare move, ESPN retracts its June 18th report regarding free agent defensive lineman Mike Pennel, admitting the story, quote, contained errors. So I am not going to repeat the story and what was the contents of it from the ESPN perspective, because that would not be fair to Mike Pennel at this point, because of ESPN basically issuing a full retraction. And it was basically everything about the report was wrong. It was definitely not good for Pennel. You guys can Google it if you want. I don't want to add on to the negativity that Pennel has already had to go through over the past month or so, especially with this ESPN reporting, now that has been fully retracted. But I want to take a step back and talk about this is a huge problem that the NFL has introduced. I talked about yesterday, it's so funny. Whenever the NFL has a good day, something comes out the next day that says, all right, there's work to do. So I talked about yesterday how league leadership is starting to learn their lesson. They're starting to operate smarter. They're starting to protect the shield. But you know what doesn't protect the shield? Bad media. And that's a huge problem right now with the NFL because they are directly in bed with ESPN. They sold NFL Network, NFL Media to ESPN. The NFL now has an ownership stake in ESPN. And I mentioned this before numerous times. ESPN, owned by Disney, isn't exactly known for being a good steward of long-loved IP. Ask Star Wars fans specifically. If you're looking for one example, there's about a million others. The reality is the media with ESPN has been in a really, really bad spiral in terms of poor performance for a very long time. There's been some isolated personalities that do good work. There's been a few personalities that drive great ratings. But the quality of reporting and the quality of content over at the four-letter network has dropped precipitously over really the past decade or so. It went from having really good analysis, really good discussions with their segments like NFL Live and things like that, to a lot of what the heck is going on now, and a lot of really bad reporting and a lot of things that are just not good. And this, to me, is the perfect situation for the NFL to, if I was them, to try and see if I can get more out of the deal from ESPN, get more leverage. Because the NFL controlling ESPN, as weird as that sounds, is a lot better than the NFL, basically being an owner, a shareholder in ESPN and hoping ESPN figures it out. Because I don't think ESPN can or will. They just can't. I don't think they have the ability to at this point. They've gone so far off the deep end. I understand they're trying to course correct. But there's the reason, right? Pat McAfee, when he signed his deal with ESPN, didn't become an employee. He licensed his show, right? That's very important. Why would McAfee do that? It's because he does not want to surrender creative control. He understands the damage ESPN could do. Now, I'm kind of reading his mind there a little bit, but if you look at the deal, I think it makes sense from his perspective. He could have actually made, on a salary level, more money because he's taken basically, roughly the same amount of dollars to license his show as he would get as a salaried employee like Stephen A. Smith is. But he wanted more control. He correctly understood that ESPN has major problems. And this is a great example of it right here. Now, I don't know what the outcome of this will be. Time will tell. But when you have the number one reporting news agency in the sports world by far, and when it comes to football, they're it. The NFL Network is gone. It doesn't exist. Right? At this point, you would sit there and say NBC Sports Pro Football Talk is number 2. And I like Pro Football Talk. I disagree with Mike Florio probably 80% of the time, but he does great work at that website in terms of what he tries to do. But they are nowhere near the level of resources as ESPN. ESPN drives the traffic. ESPN drives the news. For them to get something so outrageously and horrifically wrong and offer a stunning and rare traction, quoting Pro Football Talk there, I think that's just an indication here that the NFL screwed up. I think the good news is it's so public, and the NFL, I think, is buttoning things up a little bit. I think we've seen that over the past couple of days. I talked about that in depth yesterday. I'm actually really expecting the NFL to take a lot of control over ESPN, especially after this, because the NFL Players Association and the NFL leadership are not going to like this because it was not a good look to protect the shield when this story originally came out. Now that it turns out it was false, the NFL is going to turn to ESPN and say, what the heck is this? I'm owning a company that's destroying the shield. I think we're going to see some leverage from Roger Goodell and ESPN, and I hope we see it, and it should be seen. The fact that NFL Network is now part of ESPN or been bought by ESPN and now it's gone, I think the NFL should use every opportunity, including horrible situations like this, to take more control over the four-letter network and hopefully get it on a more stable path and get back to where things used to be, at least closer to that. All right, let's talk about this. Let's move on to more football stuff. So this is Trey McBride, again, from Pro Football Talk, talking about playing the Seahawks. Their defense is a bunch of crap talkers. Just to keep the language clean here today, I'll always like to keep it as clean as possibly can, just for anyone listening who may not be of the adult persuasion. Listen, one of the things that's great about rivalries and stuff like that is you get to kind of the inside scoop of how teams operate. But I actually really like this from a defensive back's perspective. Now, I'm personally, as a former lineman, I always thought DBs, listen, you guys talk all the time. Same thing with wide receivers. The quarterback misses the mark by 10 yards. You got beat on the coverage and you jump up celebrating and dancing. Okay, we can put that away for a second. That being said, the Seahawks defense was legitimately nasty. And I love the fact that in these rivalry games, we can see obviously McBride running. I think that's Nikamon Wari trying to chase him down there. It looks like he's trying to go for a peanut punch on the football. I love that we have these dynamics because one of the things that has happened in the NFL because of the salary cap and because of the new CBA, there's so much roster turnover. 30% of rosters turn over every single year, 30 to 40%. On average. Some years, obviously, some teams get significantly more turnover. Some teams it's a little bit less. And what happens is rivalries get diluted, right? Guys, go play for one team, then play for the rival the next year. You got guys that, have been with the team for 2 seconds, so they're not really invested in the rivalry at all. I like the fact that there's some juice between the Arizona Cardinals and Seattle Seahawks. And I know the Cardinals aren't very good, but they're a feisty team. Like they kind of punted after Thanksgiving. They said, listen, we're just going to finish out the year. And there was an ugly finish to the year for the Arizona Cardinals. But they played some really good football at times in 2025. They took a lot of really good teams down to the absolute wire. So they're kind of a feisty bunch. McBride's a great player. They got some good pieces. And I love the fact they aren't backing down, right? They're treating it like a rivalry. I forget who for the Arizona Cardinals said it earlier this offseason, says, listen, Seattle's going to deal with us. Los Angeles has to deal with us. A lot of people laughed at it. A lot of people poo-pooed it. I love it. Let's get these rivalries back. Let's make it mean something, right? I understand that, there's a friendly dynamic. They're competitors, but everyone wants to hug and shake hands after the game. I get it, but I like a little nastiness. I like a little juice between teams, interdivision rivals, even if there's supposedly a talent mismatch, because that's what makes these games where you're like, who's going to tune into Arizona, Seattle, unless you're a Seahawks or Cardinals fan? Probably not very much. But if there's a spicy rivalry, if there's some bad blood, that makes good TV, and that makes for good football. All right, let's talk about this here from around the NFL. Bears quarterback Caleb Williams on haters, quote, I love them. So one of the things that I would recommend for any player in the National Football League is to turn off the media. Ignore it. Whether they be fans, haters, whether it's people on social media, regular media, I recommend turning it off completely. Now, if Caleb Williams wants to use it as motivation and say, yeah, I love it, it gives me some juice, that's fine. But one of the things that could happen is that you become hyper-focused on what other people are saying, and you don't want to do that ever, certainly if you're in the place Caleb Williams is. Now, I think number 18 is a very good quarterback who's on the verge of, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, potentially breaking how we look at the quarterback position. I talked about yesterday about how different teams can react to modern defenses, and it's something we've spent a lot of time talking about with a lot of our content. But about a week and a half ago, I pulled up a stat of Caleb Williams saying he holds onto the football basically 2 standard deviations longer than every other quarterback in the NFL, certainly on average. And a lot of people said, that's not sustainable. And my point was, what if it is? What if Williams is just able to last that long? He's able to last 3 seconds on average before he throws it. That just destroys defenses. Defenses are saying 3 seconds, we'll cover for that long, that's it. Well, if the ball's gone at 3 seconds, that means 3 seconds has passed. By the time the ball's downfield, someone's probably open. That breaks how defenses operate. So that's the potential magic of Caleb Williams. That's potentially the value of Williams, obviously paired with a talented bunch and Ben Johnson. But my one recommendation for Caleb Williams, and again, he's obviously a much more wealthy and successful individual than I am at this point, despite being significantly younger, is turn off the social media, turn off the broadcast media, ignore the haters. Focus on you. Ben Johnson is going to make your life hard enough. The Bears coaching staff is going to make your life hard enough. Ignore the noise. One of the problems that quarterbacks, I think, run into, especially younger guys, is, and players too, not just quarterbacks, but they hear the noise. They hear the haters and like, yeah, it fuels me, gets me going. And that's great. But here's the problem with that motivation. If you look for external motivation, either positively or negatively, what happens when it changes? What do you do then? Are you no longer motivated? Let's say the haters just die down 50% for whatever reason. What do you do then? Do you stop showing up to work? Do you start being lazy? Internal motivation is what you want. Look at Brady. Look at Manning. You should strive to have an internal desire to be great. I'm not saying Williams doesn't. I just would like him to focus more on the internal as opposed to the external. All right. Moving on to this from Adam Schefter. Jaguars announced football promotions for Shane Waldron, who is now the assistant head coach / pass game coordinator, and Heath Farwell, who is now the assistant head coach / special teams coordinator. So big promotions there for those two men. Congrats to both of them. Here's my question, though. Why is it happening on July 1st, yesterday, July 2nd today? What's going on there? Right? We know coaching staff changes happen generally in January, sometimes in February. Every once in a while, you'll get something happen in March, but why are we changing the staff after mini camps, right before training camp? It just seems weird to me. You had an off-season program where Waldron and Farwell were in their specific roles. And I'll admit, I'm not deep into the weeds of the political machinations of the Jacksonville Jaguars coaching staff. So obviously, I'm not 100% well-versed. But just from a high-level perspective, it doesn't make sense, right? The season, for all practical purposes, from a coaching perspective, has already begun, right? You got the draft, you got your players, you have the offseason program, you had rookie minicamps, voluntary OTAs, mandatory minicamps. You've already installed a lot of your offense and defense. You started looking at position battles and things like that, and now you're changing coaches. Now you're adjusting the staff. Now, listen, if you were in a bad spot before and you don't want to keep going down a bad spot, so I understand, right? You don't want to, be thinking to yourself, we got a bad team, we got a bad coaching staff, but it's too late to make a change. No, you want to make the changes. I understand that. But I do think it's sort of bizarre to wait this long unless there was some real categorical problem. And I don't think that's the case with Jacksonville, but maybe it is. But it just seems like a weird way to run an organization. And the reason I pick up on this is when the Jacksonville Jaguars, with a few of their draft picks, they were considered big reaches. They were considered, big time. Hey, what are you doing here? You got the guy's the 200th best player in the draft consensus big boards, and you picked him up at number 50. Not saying that happened literally like that, but it was for a lot of their picks. And a lot of out of the conversation out of Jacksonville after the fact was, we're here to prove these people wrong. And that's not really a good framing, right? The goal isn't to prove the media wrong. The goal is to win football games. And I don't know the reason for this move. I don't know if this was the right move. I don't know if it was the wrong move. But it just feels bizarre to me, right? You look at the good teams. You look at the championship teams. Do they make these kind of changes? Maybe they do, and maybe I'm misremembering it. But it feels like the Jaguars here are just, it feels to me making moves just to make moves. You know what I mean? I talk about this all the time. There are some organizations, usually the not so good ones, where if things get quiet for too long, they want to do something. Oh, let's get in the headlines. Let's make a deal. Let's cut a player. Let's trade a player. Let's do an extension. It may not be the best thing for the team, but we need to generate some news. We need to generate some buzz. And if you look at the Jaguars building new stadium, good team last year. A lot of people don't really expect them to be as good in 2026. Young coach, young GM. A lot of their publicity this offseason has not been 100% positive. A-Chain gone, Lloyd gone, although I think Lloyd's a little bit overrated as a player, but he's still left. Offseason in question, draft in question. It feels to me like they're trying to make some news here. And I'm probably reading too much into it. It feels weird. Let me know what you guys think. I mean, it just feels bizarre to make coaching staff promotions in July. You've already had mini camps. You've already had OTAs. Why are you waiting now? Why wouldn't you do this in April? Right? Why wouldn't you do this in March? I guess theoretically, you're waiting to see what these coaches did in OTAs and mini camps. Maybe that's the rationale. But if you're waiting to promote your coaching staff based on what happens at mini camp, to me, that's a sign of an even bigger problem, right? If you're like, I don't know if this guy's a good coach or not. I don't know if he should be our passing game coordinator. You know what? He did a good job in this practice with helmets on Tuesday. He deserves a 20% raise. If that's your logic, that's not so good either. So really questionable here from Jacksonville's perspective. Will it have a big impact on the season? I'm sure it won't. But again, we talk about all the time. The three things you need to win in the NFL: quarterback, coach, and infrastructure. And this falls into that second bucket. And coach includes coaching staff. Kind of a weird move here to alter the coaching staff a little bit. Will it introduce some problems long term? Could. Something to keep an eye on. All right. Let's talk about this here from Ari Myrov. This is a really great story. Love to see this. So Bills wide receiver DJ Moore was at a Buffalo mall when he saw a store selling his jersey T-shirts. He bought the entire stock for $1,200 as the assistant manager to give them away for free to Bills fans. Let me just say this. This is exactly, every young NFL player, I hope they see this. This is exactly what you do. $1,200 is a lot of money, even to an NFL player. But it's not, especially for a guy like DJ Moore who signed some big deals, it's not money that is like life-altering to, wow, that's too much for him. What it does do is it buys infinite goodwill. It buys true loyalty, right? And I know people talk about you can't buy loyalty, and I think to a point that's true. But one of the things that happens, and I'll speak as a fan here for a second, a lot of fans, myself included, look at these players and like, are you a mercenary? Are you really bought into the team, the city, the future of this team? Or are you just here to collect a paycheck? Especially guys, once they get to the older part of their career, Are you really invested in the community? I mean, you don't live here year round. Like, what's going on? DJ Moore, this is just awesome, right? This is a guy who shows up and says, oh, cool, you're selling my stuff. Here, I'll buy all of it, give it away for free. Every kid walking by, every fan walking by, give him the shirt for free, covered by me. This is fantastically awesome. Classic good dude stuff. And while I was not a fan of this trade from the Bills' perspective, I think the Bears won the deal when it comes to value. I think this clearly is such a great culture guy. Seems to fit what Buffalo's all about. The Bills as a fan base seem to be perfectly aligned with this kind of thing historically. So this honestly makes me feel a little bit better about this trade. Now, I don't know about DJ Moore's production on the field. I don't know how he'll integrate into the offense with Josh Allen, but from just a culture perspective, from a leadership perspective, from a great move perspective, shout out to DJ Moore. This is one of the best things I've seen this offseason. This is really, really good stuff, and I'm glad to see it. I think more NFL players should take notice of stuff like this. All right, let's move on to this from Pro Football Network. So I think it's kind of interesting. The highest graded NFL offensive tackles last season per PFN's O-line impact metric. Number 1 is Penei Sewell, a pretty big gap. Then Garrett Bowles with Denver, a pretty big gap. And then we got Colton McKivitz, Andrew Thomas, Zach Tom, Trent Williams, Darnell Wright, Titus Howard, Warren McClendon, and then Jordan Mailata. So there's definitely an interesting cast of characters on here. Colton McKivitz is a guy I was not expecting to see, but I guess he had a fantastic season. Garrett Bowles is a great story because early in his career, he was not good, and he developed and became an all-pro. And I love bringing up Garrett Bowles here, and I know Sewell just is head and shoulders above the rest, and he's going to be great for the Lions. He's a phenomenal player, deserves all the recognition. Really strong argument he's the best tackle in football. But Bowles, to me, is such a good story because his first few years in the NFL were awful. Were terrible. Not doing anything well at all. Really struggling. People were calling him a bust. But he kept working, kept developing. He figured it out. And this is why I always look at organizations, and I pick on Minnesota and Indianapolis a lot for their failure to develop the quarterback position. And I said, listen, I understand the need to constantly take multiple bites at the apple if you're not sure if you have the guy. But if you invest heavily in a guy, the Colts with Richardson, the Vikings with McCarthy, and you pull the plug after a few, a rough season or a few rough games, that's really bad. You got to let players develop. The Broncos could have pulled the plug on Garrett Bowles and said, listen, couple years, we gave him 2 years, not so good. But they kept developing him. They kept working him, and he became an all-pro player. This is the lesson. Listen, there's a lot of rookies, obviously, that were drafted and signed this offseason. Some of them will be good right out the gate. Some of them will be draft bust. Some of them will be really bad right out the gate. But if you give it time and let them develop, they'll become great players. Development is so key. I always talk about how a lot of times fans and writers alike will view NFL players like avatars in a video game, like a Madden video game. And what I mean by that is, those guys are rated on a game on a scale of 1 to 100, right? A 99 is a great player, a 50 is not so good. And a lot of times we look at a guy and say, oh, he's a 75, and that's who he is forever, right? We see him play 1 year or one game even, we're like, this is just who he is. The reality is players get better, players get worse. And credit to Garrett Bowles for putting in the time and becoming a better football player. Credit to the Denver Broncos for sticking with him. All right, working our way through the rest of this list here. Listen, Thomas, really good for the Giants, underrated player. Tom, really, really good player for the Packers. Trent Williams is going to go in the Hall of Fame. Darnell Wright had a sneaky good season for the Bears. Titus Howard's interesting because the Texans moved on from Titus Howard. That may have been a function of fit. Listen, offensive tackles, offensive linemen in general are just like any other position. Sometimes it's not a good fit. Sometimes there's a good player and you're like, not exactly what we're looking for. Alex Gibbs was a longtime offensive line coach, and he was big in these zone blocking schemes. He was with the 49ers and with the Denver Broncos, late 90s, 2000s, with Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan's father. He had a very specific style of offensive lineman. There was a lot of all-pro linemen, some of the Hall of Fame guys, that could not have played in Gibbs' system just because they weren't great fits. So we look at receivers, is he a good fit? Defensive players, are they a good fit? Quarterbacks, is he a good fit? Sometimes offensive linemen aren't a good fit, and I think that's what the Texans saw with Howard. Mailata at the bottom of the list here is a really good offensive lineman as well. So hard for me to disagree with anything on this list. I think Sewell has probably the best argument to be the best offensive tackle in the game, which is, again, why the Lions, interestingly enough, are kind of being slept on a little bit. Now, I think there are some concerns with the roster, but we have a deep dive, by the way, talking about a leader they added this offseason that isn't getting enough attention, so Lions fans, stay tuned for that. But I do look at this Lions team and say, okay, good veteran quarterback, best offensive playmaker in the game, in my opinion, Jahmyr Gibbs, really good tight end, big play receiver, really good slot receiver, And suddenly this offense is got pieces everywhere, everything you need. Great edge rusher, secondary good when healthy, all pro linebacker. There are flaws, but they have defensive tackle, Tyleik Williams, good run stuffing defensive tackle, which you need. Need some more talent on edge. They added some guys in the offseason. We'll see what happens there. So they're not a perfect roster. But if you look at just the top flight talent in terms of the boxes you need to check, the Lions check the boxes like very emphatically. You need an offensive playmaker. They got it in Jahmyr Gibbs. You need a veteran smart quarterback, Jared Goff. You need a great tackle. You got it in Sewell, right? You need a reliable receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You need a big play guy, reliable tight end, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta. You need a great edge rusher, Aiden Hutchinson. You need a leader of the defense. You need a veteran guy to take the charge. That's Jack Campbell, right? You need some secondary talent. Some questions there, but when healthy, they've got some good guys, certainly at the safety position with Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, great offseason addition of Chuck Clark as well. So I'm not going to tell you the Lions are the best roster in the NFL and the NFC. They are not. But they're a lot better than people think. I think right now I've seen some people have the Lions finishing with like the third best record in the NFC North, which to me, they're much closer to being the best team in the NFC North than they are the third best team. That's just my opinion. I think they underperformed last year. I think their record, 9-8, missing the playoffs. I think that was a function of underperformance, poor coaching, and just a bad year for Detroit, as opposed to that's who they really are. Both time will tell. All right, let's talk about this to end the news for today. This is from Legion Hoops, talking basketball, but I think it's pretty interesting. I'm curious what you guys think about this. I don't really know how to feel about this. Blake Griffin reveals he never used a sports psychologist after he discovered his was leaking his deepest conversations. The Clippers hired a sports psychologist that everyone was required to meet with. We talked, and when he left, I went to take a shower. When I got out, I seen I had a voicemail. It was the psychologist, and he said, "Hey, coach, just left Blake's house. Great talk, and we discussed some interesting things." I was like, oh my God, I'm never meeting with another sports psychologist again. So this feels like probably, hopefully, an isolated incident where the sports psychologist did something he should not have. But I do think there's an important lesson in there for all of us. And this is whether it's with the National Football League, players, coaches, or with all of us in our day-to-day lives, is that, the business we work for, the company we work for, operates with the best interest of that company in mind, with that organization in mind. Could be a charity, could be the government. It's never with our personal interest. If they're aligned, if our personal interests are aligned with that organization's, fantastic. But if they're divergent, the company is going to put the company's interest ahead of it, right? That's why layoffs happen and things like that. And I think a lot of us understand that, but I think we kind of look at sports as sort of a different lens, because many of us played Little League or high school where it wasn't this hyper-professional environment. Even in college, which I played small-time college football, Division I AA FCS, it wasn't quite this brutal, quite this level. But I do think big-time professional sports is, just like any other corporate entity, just like any other big business, any other big entity. And so I don't think this should come as a big surprise. I think the lesson here, though, is that the organizations where everything is aligned, where the player incentives are aligned with the team incentives, that's where special happens. Where they're divergent, that's where you run into issues. And it's every level of the organization. That's why I always talk about you need coach, quarterback, organization / infrastructure, right? You've got to have a good quarterback to win. You got to have a good coach to win. I think that's pretty obvious. But you also have to have a good front office. You have to have a good owner. You have to have a good infrastructure, good support system around the players. And that includes everything from equipment manager to cafeteria staff to, sports psychologists acting professionally, everything, right? You need a buttoned up organization. I always look for teams that have really clean cut, buttoned up operations. I don't like a lot of leaks. If a team's got a lot of leaky news, I'm like, okay, this isn't buttoned up. If they've got players complaining about, the field or complaining about the food, I'm like, okay, there's some problems there, right? The report card thing, for example, the NFLPA put out, I took that with a grain of salt because, listen, if you're a rookie and you've been, with the team for 5 seconds, how can you grade it? If you're a veteran and you've been with one team for 4 years, how do you know how to grade your team's cafeteria, right? You've only been with one team. Could be A+, but you think it's not so good, so you give it a C. Right? It could be the best in the league. You just don't know, right? You just don't have that context. So I do think there was some, not a whole lot of great information could be gleaned from all that, to be totally honest. But I do think what we really need to understand is that if you look at the winning franchises, they're all buttoned up. They're all great organizations. Look at the Chiefs, 100% buttoned up. The Patriots under Belichick, hyper buttoned up to the extreme. You go back and look at a lot of the great dynasties in sports and the NFL. Very clean cut, very well-run operation. After the fact, there'd be the exposés. The writers would say what was really going on behind the scenes. But during the operation, no leaks, buttoned up, everyone's aligned from the lowest level of the organization to the top. And I think as much as this story is sort of a good reminder sometimes of organizations may not be necessarily aligned with the individuals. When you have alignment throughout the entire organization and everyone's incentives are heading in the right direction, special can happen. And so I think that's something to keep in mind on when you look at your team and all the teams this offseason, this season, and for years to come. Do you see teams where everything's aligned, where the player, the coach, the front office, the infrastructure, the janitor, everybody is aligned in the same direction? Once you get that, you have a chance to be special. All right, let's get into the comment section, guys. First comment here is from Lee86Thunder. Really liking the channel and your takes. Well, I really appreciate that. Thanks. You guys find a lot of hidden gem info too. One thing I do wonder, though, is what is Saturday morning inspection? I know the definition, but is that a term used in the NFL or something? No, great question. So my co-host and I we were roommates at a military college. And so a big part of that was Saturday morning inspections, right? And so when we wanted to come up with the name of the show, when we first started doing content, it was originally just going to be a one-time show, Saturday mornings, right, to start the weekend off. And so we said, what are we going to call it? Oh, we'll call it Saturday morning inspection and play on our time in school. Obviously, as the show changed and morphed, we kept the name, we kept the branding. It doesn't really align now because we have content literally every day of the week, including, obviously the daily show, all our deep dives, film reviews during the season, all that kind of officiating reviews, all the stuff we do, throughout the entire year. We got multiple different channels. We got multiple different things going on. So it's kind of expanded, but that's how it started, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of confusing. It doesn't make a whole, from a base level, it doesn't really kind of add up. It's like, I'm watching a show on Thursday. Why is it called Saturday morning inspection? Well, it's because originally it was only going to be a Saturday show. You mad my guy G963 says, hey Nick, I definitely see your point on that. Sorsby's career is probably over, but the only thing I can think of is the COVID year had players opt out of the season and they were still drafted. Like Jamar Chase sat out a year and was still drafted in the top 10. I'm not saying Sorsby is as talented as Chase, but if he trains this whole time leading up to the draft, then I can see him getting drafted, but probably no higher than a 5th rounder or so. Me personally, I don't think he's the 1st round pick, even if he was able to play this season. I hope he still gets a chance to play again. By the way, I want to shout you out for something very positive. I hope he still gets a chance to play again. I can't tell you how disappointed I've seen people that say, I hope he never gets a chance. This is a college kid. Yeah, he made some mistakes. Who hasn't? At 21, 22, anyone watching this, if you're past the age of 21, 22, you look back at your time at 21, 22 and say, I was an idiot. I made a million mistakes. I know I have. And there's not a single man I know that doesn't believe the same thing, who's honest with themselves. So shout out to you, man. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you said this because I believe this too. I hope Sorsby gets a chance. I hope he gets every opportunity that he earns, because the idea that he should never ever be allowed to be within a mile of a football field ever again is I don't like that. Yeah, he made a mistake. He's dealing with the ramifications of it. Like let him deal with it. He's going to have to overcome it. It's going to be a really tough situation. I think his career's over personally. But I hope he gets a chance. I'm actually, tell you what, I'm rooting for him now. Because the number of people that have come out of the woodwork and said, I hope he's a terrible person. He's the worst human being ever. He's a 21, 22-year-old kid. What were you doing at 21, 22? I hate when I see people do that. Really, really irritates me. I mean, he's a college kid. Good Lord. I mean, like, people are acting like, he's Bernie Madoff, who had this great Ponzi scheme for decades, swindling hundreds of millions of dollars. He's a 21-year-old kid who made a bunch of stupid decisions, right? That, really only affected him, to be totally honest. Listen, he's got to deal with it, but let's give him a chance. But your point with the COVID thing is a very good point. I think that's very fair. My only caveat to this, and be interesting to go back and look as to what percentage of good players sat out. Because I know like Micah Parsons sat out, Jamar Chase sat out, like you said, a bunch of people did. But because it was more than one, I think it kind of diluted. And because it was COVID, I think people were more understanding of it, right? So it may have been just a one-off thing, but it definitely, you bring up a very fair point. It's not without precedent. And I said, and this is where it's worth a fact check. I said, we have never seen a player sit out a year. I think I said suspended, but sit out a year is basically the same, and then do well, then get drafted. Well, you fact checked me correctly there. There have been instances, right? COVID was probably the most prominent one, obviously. So thank you for holding me accountable to that. I really appreciate that. That's a great comment. Thank you. That's awesome work. Kyron Williams, this is from Michael Miller. He says, Kyron Williams has 3,797 combined yardage over the last 3 years with 44 TDs plus 520 yards and 5 touchdowns in the playoffs. Hell yes, he's a top 5 running back and he's great in pass pro. He pancaked Myles Garrett. That's more than James Cook, more than Christian McCaffrey, more than Jonathan Taylor. I don't blame you, though. Google AI listed those three when I asked about Kyren Williams. It glitched out and failed to generate stats twice. Well, to be fair, AI can glitch out and be inaccurate, but I wasn't using AI, right? I think I was using logic. So what we're going to do here is let's pull up the rushing leaders from 2025, right? Just to give us a framing of top 5 running backs in the National Football League. So I'm going to name you some names of guys I think are better, and I don't think it's much of an argument, than Kyren Williams. Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs. All those 3 guys had less rushing yards than Kyren Williams. I think they're better. I think Bijan Robinson and Derrick Henry are better as well. So there's 5 right off the rip, right? You can make an argument Devon Achane and James Cook are, right, as well. Now, I think that's more of a debate. I think you could sit there and say, well, Williams is better than Cook. Maybe he's better than Achane. And I think that's very fair. That's something you can discuss. But I don't think you can say, honestly, you can say he's better than Jonathan Taylor. I don't think so, but you can make that argument. But I think Derrick Henry is clearly better than Kyren Williams. McCaffrey, Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson, I think, are clearly better as well. So, Barkley too, right? I think, and again, maybe you disagree. I'm open to debate there. But this notion that it's, he's guaranteed a top 5 running back is, listen, there's a lot of great backs last season. I mean, there were looking at the numbers here, 17 guys that ran for 1,000 yards or more, right? And that's not counting, really good players that were limited due to injury or were splitting carries, right? They're really nice players. Josh Jacobs for the Green Bay Packers, for example, was a guy that was splitting touches, had a really good season dealing with some injuries. Tony Pollard on a bad team is a good running back, right? DeAndre Swift for the Bears splitting carries too. So there was a lot of really good backs last season in the National Football League. And Kyren Williams, good player, but is he a top 100 player in the NFL? That feels like a stretch, because remember, if you're top 100, you're at the 4th or 5th best at your position. And listen, I would tell you right now, I would put McCaffrey, Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan and Derrick Henry clearly ahead. And there's an argument that Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, and Achane are better as well. I mean, again, you can disagree with that. That's fine. But I think it's not as clear-cut as some people make it out to be. All right. Go back to the next comment here is from Rob Blake 602. He says, thanks, Nick. Better play calling. We'll put the Panthers on the main menu and off the palate cleanser sheet. Why can't Sourceby be an undrafted free agent? When it comes to the Carolina Panthers, I think this is a big year for Canales in the offense. I do agree with that assessment 100% because they invested heavily, right? And basically what they said by not giving Bryce Young a big contract, they're like, Canales, we think you're the real stall that stirs the drink here. And if Canales' offense does well, then I think the Panthers will be proven correct. If he doesn't do well, then I think Carolina may not be in a great situation. But let's talk about Sourceby. Why can't he be an undrafted free agent? So the way it works, and give me a little rope here with the specifics, but you have to declare for the NFL draft. And basically saying you have to go through, it's really just a kind of paperwork process to become a player to be selected. And then if you're not selected, you enter into a pool of players that can be signed, right? That's how it works. So for example, the NFL can't call me and sign me today. Can't happen. I have to submit paperwork to the National Football League. Now, usually it's pretty simple, and they have to make, basically it's a way to check to make sure that teams don't, wouldn't happen today, but, don't do celebrity things. Like some team doesn't draft Brad Pitt or something or sign Brad Pitt just to drive ratings for training camp practice. You have to make sure the NFL's like, okay, are you a real player? You're not 80 or something like that. You're not 14, right? So the NFL, for example, requires you to be 3 years out from graduating high school. So that's one of the requirements. That's why not everybody can just enter the NFL draft right off the rope and just be an undrafted free agent. That's why, let's say these great college freshmen, they sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to leave the college game and just be an undrafted free agent and get signed. The NFL doesn't allow that. You have to apply to be entered into the draft, which if you don't get drafted, then you get entered into a pool. Because Sourceby didn't apply to enter the regular draft, he tried to go supplemental draft, and the NFL rejected that. So he's not even eligible to be signed. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a weird process, I will admit, but hopefully that clears things up a little bit. But all right, guys, that is the show for today. Listen, when it comes to the NFL and ESPN, not a great day for the four-letter network. Hopefully the NFL is going to use this situation to basically hold ESPN to account and leverage their relationship with the major sports power and get them back on the straight and narrow, get them in a good spot, especially as we get closer to the season. One of the things the NFL, I think, is doing is sort of, button things up a little bit. They're making some moves to secure the shield, and hopefully that continues in the sports media landscape. We'll have to see what happens, of course, long-term on that front. And I will be here long-term to discuss the latest news across the National Football League with you guys, starting, of course, tomorrow morning. But until then, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.